All right, Kevin, we're live.
Good afternoon, superintendents and other guests. Welcome to the special superintendent's webcast on May 5th, 2020. We, of course, have a packed agenda today, and we have 2 hours allotted. We also know it's popular. The last item was the question and answers, and we have that Go Soapbox form for you to ask questions, and the access code is hashtag KDE COVID. You all feel free to start logging your questions into the Go Soapbox, and we will have the question and answer session at the end. We also have the ability to, of course, take questions related to the various subject matters that we're going to cover today. The first one being a little bit more detail than we provided in the past on the equitable service requirement under the CARES Act. And then we have a 2020 legislative update with Tracy Herman, and then an update from Karen Dodd on the work of the Education Continuation Task Force. That task force met yesterday. And then after that, I have a bit of an update on the opening of school next year and what that might look like. And then we're going to dedicate next week's webcast to that very issue. I have some recent information on that from the governor's office to help guide us there. And then, so Dr. Foster, we will let you take it away. We have the PowerPoint up and going. And Dr. Foster, I'll also let you make the announcement. I believe we received a big check here a few minutes ago.
Good afternoon. Yes, and Robin Kinney may want to jump in on this as well, but we just received notification that we have received the approval of our ESSER funds. So that's great news, and we will have more information coming from Robin Kinney's office on how you're going to access those dollars, and more information will be coming on from my office around a cross-agency guidance document that you will use in spending those funds. So great news to start the webcast off with. Robin, anything you want to say on that?
No, I'll just add that we will be rolling out our assurance document, so everyone can be able to take a look at that. And as Kelly has indicated, that guidance on expenditures will come a little bit later.
Okay, at this time, I would like to turn it over to David Malonte in my office, and he is going to talk to you and provide some guidance around the equitable services. We've had several questions from you all over the last couple of weeks, and we finally received guidance midweek last week from Ed. So at this time, I'll turn it over to David, and he is going to share that information with you.
Thanks, Kelly. As most of you probably already know, equitable services will be required under the CARES Act for both GEARS money and ESSER money. Last week, as Kelly said, the U.S. Department of Education released guidance specifically on the equitable services questions. That guidance we sent out last week and was issued in this Monday's email to superintendents, and covered several topics, including which private school staff and students would be eligible for services, district's responsibilities for providing those services, the requirements around consultation for services, how to calculate the equitable amounts designated for services, and then the types of services that would be allowable under the Act. Let's go to the next slide. So under the CARES Act, any private school or home school in the state of Kentucky that was in existence prior to March 13, 2020, including those not currently participating in services in any other covered program, would be eligible for services under the CARES Act. Unlike, I know these funds were distributed under the Title I formula, but unlike the Title I equitable services requirement, these services are only provided to those private schools within your district's boundaries. So I know, for example, under Title I Part A, you have to, well, funds follow kids across district boundaries. That is not the case for these funds. As a note at the bottom, all private school students and staff are eligible to participate in services. So as in Title I, there is no residency restrictions, no restrictions based on achievement of students, and there's also no supplement, not supplant requirement for these services. Let's go to the next slide. The guidance does outline several district responsibilities, and a lot of those your federal programs coordinators are going to be familiar with. So there must be an offer of services. Currently, I'm working on a text for a sample letter that can be used to offer those services to private schools. We haven't quite figured out what the timeline for that will be, but we're going to have those ready and vetted and issued in the near future. There would be consultation and submission of a consultation agreement required to be submitted to the state's non-public school ombudsman. That ombudsman is me. Currently, what I'm doing is revising the consultation agreement we currently use, but I'm trying to make it as short and simple as possible. Right now, it looks like it's going to include some contact information for both the district and the non-public schools, just 2 narratives, and hopefully just a signature line for affirming the agreement for which services are to be provided. You will have to, as a district, collect enrollment data and determine equitable services amounts reserved. We hope to have that calculation done in a very simple application, but the collection of enrollment data, just to clarify, that again is not based on the Title I rules. The data you collect from private schools will be total enrollment across the K-12 grade spans within each private school. Just as in normal services under ESSA and other programs, the statute requires public control of funds. The district is to retain title to materials, equipment, and property. The district must maintain oversight and administration of those services. And again, the statute, just as normal, requires timely provision of those services. As a side note, just like every other program under ESSA, under Title I and Title VIII, no funds may go directly to a private school. Let's go to the next slide, please. So what types of services may be provided? Well, the offerings are wide open, really. In general, services and benefits available to non-public school students and teachers are the same as those available to public schools. So that might include cleaning and sanitation, any type of activity that is authorized under the Every Student Succeeds Act. There may be professional development opportunities for teachers across the board. There may be the opportunity to purchase and provide professional development about technology used to enhance distance learning. And this is not an exhaustive list, so if it is an allowable cost under the CARES Act, it's probably going to be an allowable cost for non-public schools as well. So Tony, that was my last slide. Do we want to stop for questions at this point or move on?
How do you want to proceed? Do you want to stop? And I think we can probably
If you
go.
If you have questions now that have come in on this topic, let's go ahead. I think it's always better to do it while we're addressing the issue.
Okay.
If you have any, Tony.
All right, let me refresh this over here and check really quick. I'm not seeing any on here right now.
Okay, Tony, I'll stay on till the end, so if there are some, I'll be happy to
Okay.
assist.
All right, hold on, it's reloading, so we'll just check it out here. 1 second. It says it takes a few seconds, but it's taking a little bit longer than normal, so.
A little fun fact while we're waiting, courtesy of David Couch, is that the hours of 2 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. are the height of internet. It's the height of internet traffic due to everyone telecommuting. So we've found, though, that 2 o'clock is the best time, I think, for the superintendents is why we have it. But sometimes I think when we do have some technical difficulties, that could be the cause.
Okay. There we go. It did say that it was taking extra time. So we do have, okay, so I have a couple of questions that are not related to this particular topic, so I'll wait for those for a moment. Has it been determined yet? Well, no, that was more for Robin, more about how gear funds will be distributed to districts and how much districts will receive. And I think that Robin had mentioned that they are working on, we are working on developing cross-agency guidance documents on both gears and the other sources, and that those should be available within a couple of weeks. Robin, did you want to jump in on that real quick? Because I see 2 questions on
Sure.
that.
Sure, I'll be glad to. We are still talking about the method of distribution. Appreciate those that have provided input on your thoughts. It will be faster than a couple of weeks because we want to get this money out quickly. So I would say in the next couple of days, we'll make a determination on that.
Okay, will the FRAM deadline of October 1 be extended? FRAM deadline of October 1 be extended?
We haven't really talked at this point about extending that deadline. As all deadlines are fairly fluid at this point, we talk about all deadlines and the impact on districts, but at this point, we have not moved the FRAM deadline.
All right, and then this other is kind of with CARES is, can the cost for an alternative graduation ceremony be paid through CARES Act?
I think under the ESSER funds, that would be permissible. You're going through an alternative program as a result of the COVID pandemic. So I think that could be one of the permissible uses.
Okay, there's a question from private schools. Does this include homeschools in our district?
It does include homeschools. Those are considered non-public schools in the state of Kentucky.
Okay, and just to clarify, CARES funds are allocated based on location of school, not the resident of the students.
That is correct. Funds to private schools or funds reserved for private school services will be, the reservation amount will be based on the location of the school and based on total enrollment in that school, not based on district to district residency.
Okay, and then do we have to reach out to homeschools in our district regarding ESSER funds?
That would be a yes, as long as they were in operation on the date stated in that slide earlier.
All right, let's see here. I'm looking to see, I don't think this is entirely May 25th, when the governor allows less than 10 to meet, will schools be allowed to offer on? No, this is not related to ESSER. So I think the rest of these are going to be related to later in the discussion. So if we want to move on to Tracy.
Yes, David, do you have any closing comments, or Kelly on this area?
Not for me. I mean, maybe just be on the lookout for some additional guidance coming on equitable schools.
All right, and David and Dr. Foster, of course, will be with us the entire webcast. So if you do think of questions related to the equitable services under CARES, feel free to put that on Soapbox, and we can still get you an answer on the webcast.
Real quick, I would just remind everyone that guidance went out yesterday in the Monday email. So if you haven't had a chance to read that yet, go back and take a look, because there's lots of good resources around this topic in yesterday's email. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Foster. We'll now move to the 2020 legislative update with Tracy Herman. We've all been consumed with COVID-19 issues, and this is going to be a reminder that we have some education-related legislation that's been signed into law that we all need to make sure we're aware of and the impact that that may have on your district. So, Tracy, I'll turn it over to you, and I think she has several slides that summarize these education-related bills.
Yep. Oh.
Thanks, Commissioner Brown. This was a bit of an unusual session, mainly because of what's been going on with the national pandemic and COVID. The legislature only used 53 of their 60 legislative days this session and did a very truncated process for the last few days. The public wasn't allowed in the building. They tried to televise a few more education committee and other committee meetings. And so we're not quite sure what that's going to look like for the interim, which is supposed to start in June. But I suspect that the General Assembly will have somewhat of an abbreviated or a different looking interim session based on what we've seen so far at the end of the 2020 regular session. We saw 1,402 bills and resolutions filed. This does not include all of the pieces of legislation for amendments and for committee substitutes. We saw 126 bills passed this session, which makes about 99% of the total, a little lower than normal, but we still saw a tremendous amount of activity early in the session. We're going to start off with Senate bills moving first. We'll start with Senate Bill 8, which is an update to the school safety bill from last session. It updates the definition of a school resource officer, and it does now require that each school resource officer is to be armed with a firearm. The third goal that it really did, the third major thing that it did, is it updated the goal for regarding school counselors. It does have some funding in the state budget bill. House Bill 352 is provided to help with hiring school-based mental health service providers. $7.4 million was allocated to do that. Senate Bill 42, on the next slide, requires that any student identification badge issued to a student in grades 6 through 12 by a public school, if you do provide badges, must contain contact information for national hotlines for domestic violence, sexual assault, and suicide prevention. A similar provision in the legislation also requires this to be put in place for post-secondary. Senate Bill 57, Senator Carroll's bill, amends the American Heart Association legislation from last session, and it requires that only the Commissioner of Education has to approve local school district plans for school construction or renovation that included water bottle filling stations. The law deletes the requirement for renovations, but leaves in place the requirement for new construction. Senate Bill 63, Senator Higdon has filed this legislation previously. It finally passed this session, and it permits a local board of education to establish a virtual high school completion program. This is designated and dedicated to high school dropouts who are at least 21 years of age, and the requirements can be met for high school graduation completion through virtual instruction. Senate Bill 79 is becoming an annual statutory update to any of the background check statutes. This particular change defines administrative findings of child abuse or neglect. One thing that it did not do, though it came out in the committee substitute but was back in the end, is that the bill maintains the requirement that a classified or certified employee of a school district must self-report a substantiated finding to the superintendent. Senate Bill 82 establishes a new council, the Eating Disorder Council, and it's going to be located at the Cabinet for Health and Family Services. It does include the Commissioner of Education or his or her designee as a member of that group. Senate Bill 101 requires the Council on Post-Secondary Education to facilitate the development and implementation of a statewide standardized articulation agreement between public colleges and universities and the Department of Education. Senate Bill 102 was the Cabinet for Health and Family Services cleanup bill. One change to that, though, is that to the Kentucky Commission on Services and Supports for Individuals with an Intellectual Disability and Other Developmental Delays, developmental disabilities, it does include the Commissioner of Education or his or her designee to that commission. Probably the most significant piece of legislation regarding K through 12 education for this session was Senate Bill 158. This is a significant shift in the accountability system. It requires us basically to redo the accountability and assessment system and create a new system to evaluate state indicators on two categories, status and change. It establishes that we have to create new cut scores to be determined for these new ratings for status and change, and those scores have to stay in place for 6 years. KDE has to create a new reporting requirement dashboard demonstrating status and change for each indicator. It does allow us to create a new overall score, which will allow us to identify for support and improvement the bottom 5% per federal requirement. It does align the definitions for targeted support and improvement and comprehensive support and improvement with federal requirements, which is an important shift for us after Senate Bill 175 from last session getting us unaligned. Also on page 11 of, the slide numbers have changed, Senate Bill 58 for audit and turnaround, it updates those provisions as well. It requires KDE to conduct the audit. It does remove language for local boards to create their own turnaround training and support teams. That language has come out of the bill, as well as it removes language allowing local boards of education to choose a turnaround specialist. It now requires local boards to choose it from a KDE approved vendor list. Tony, if you wouldn't mind advancing to, I guess, about slide 18, goes to Title I funds. This requires the Department of Education to promulgate administrative regulations to disperse school improvement funds. This is already required federally, so I'm not quite sure what that's going to look like. Senate Bill 158 also makes changes about graduation requirements, and it prohibits the minimum requirements for high school graduation to include post-secondary readiness indicators used in state accountability system or a minimum score to be used for a graduation requirement. It also prohibits local boards from including this in their own provisions after the minimum high school graduation requirement. The legislation also requires the department to provide a report to the General Assembly about the turnaround vendors and their performance. It redefines achievement gaps. It also makes changes to charter authorizer training. The state board has already amended the regulation to do this, but this legislation also updates the requirement so that public charter school authorizer training for local school board members, they don't have to do it until they receive an application. Moving past Senate Bill 158 to Senate Bill 174, Senator McGarvey's legislation allows national board certification to qualify a teacher for rank 2 status. It also updates the principal certification requirement by removing the Kentucky specialty test and instead requiring the school leader's licensure agreement. This will also require the corresponding regulation to be updated. Senate Bill 177, you all are pretty familiar with. We've already hit several of the major pieces of legislation through other webcasts to give you updates, and this is the relief bill targeted by the General Assembly to elementary and secondary education. It addresses NTI and instructional time. It requires the department to report out to the General Assembly about how instructional time was met by districts under the COVID-19 emergency. It directs the department to provide and seek waivers for school lunch and accountability and assessment, which has already happened. It also allows some flexibility for local districts around certified evaluation plans and other things. It also addresses the 1819 versus 1920 student attendance data, which I know has already been shared with you all. Moving on to Senate Bill 193, it establishes a goal of increasing the number and percentage of students in underrepresented groups participating in computer science courses in middle and high school. The department will have to provide a report on those numbers as well. And then Senate Bill 249, it increases the amortization period for financing for the Kentucky Employee Retirement System, the County Employee Retirement System, and the State Police Retirement System from 24 to 30 years. It also froze the SERS contribution, the employer contribution rate for 1 year. Moving on to House legislation, looking at House Bill 266. This legislation that came into place, the statute came into place last year, but this is making a tweak to it and allows students of a military-connected family under certain conditions to temporarily reside outside of a district if housing is unavailable, and to also be included in the attending district's average daily attendance. House Bill 312 requires KDE to update, because we already have protocols in place, the protocols for student records transfers and the Kentucky Student Information System related to foster care students. The goal of the bill is to really expedite the process of getting records transferred more readily. It requires a foster child state agency caseworker to immediately contact the receiving school district to inform the district of the pending enrollment, which should be an improvement if that happens. It also requires the department to report to the Interjoint Committee on Education possible system improvements. House Bill 352, you've seen a great deal of information around this already as well, because this is the state budget bill. We see the base per pupil guarantees remaining at $4,000. We're seeing any unexpended SEEK funds lapsing to the general fund. The hold harmless guarantee remains. We also see equalization amounts being tiered and applied for the original growth nickel, the recallable nickel, and the EFF nickel. Looking at the next slide, it's just the overview of the appropriations for the SEEK budget unit. Looking forward, there's additional language that's provided in the Operations and Support Services budget unit, and it provides that language that a district may modify its district facility plan without convening the local planning committee, for the sole purpose of complying with the practices of controlling the entryway in each school building. This is also from Senate Bill 1 from 2019, the School Safety Act. So that language provides a little more additional flexibility. Looking forward a couple of slides, just an overview of the funding that was provided for Operations and Support Services for Ken and Ket's School Food Services Match. Looking at additional language and learning and results services, we're still back on House Bill 352. A couple slides.
Which side? Which slide, Tracy?
Your number's different than mine because you combined all of them. I think it's about 2 or 3 slides back.
Okay.
One more, I think. 2 more. One more. There we go. Additional language was provided to allow districts some flexibility in expending ESS and Safe Schools funding. However, the General Assembly included language that says you still have to meet the statutory obligations of what those original funds are meant for, even if you use ESS and Safe Schools funds for operating. Next slide. This is the mental health services provider information and the amount of money that was provided this session for additional funded positions. However, language in the budget bill, the next slide, demonstrates that they say that they took money out of all of these programs in order to fund that, but they didn't fund these programs last time except for the Kentucky Academy for Equity in Teaching. So all of those funds were stripped from those programs from last session, which caused the department to actually lose some staff. And then they were not refunded for this session. So there was no shoring up of those programs. Next slide. Learning and Results Services. This is the ATC language, and it sets out how an ATC can become locally operated on under the biennium and sets out the provisions for the transfer. The next slide is just an overview of the line items in LARS. Just a few things that are highlighted are programs outside of either local district or the state's purview. We see a couple of new ones, Job for America's Graduates Program and Kentucky Alliance for Boys and Girls Club, both were brand new and received $250,000 apiece. We saw funding continue for Save the Children, and then we also saw an increase for Teach for America and the visually impaired preschool services. But as you can see, we didn't receive funding for dropout prevention again, or for assessment testing for the ACT grade 10 test. Next slide. Additional general provisions in the state budget bill allows local districts to adopt a working budget that includes a minimum reserve of less than 2% under KBE approval. It provided $581,000 to the Education and Workforce Development Cabinet for the Office of Employer and Apprenticeship Services. It does require them to report to the Interim Joint Committee on Education how those funds are being utilized, though. The Energy and Environment Cabinet is in charge of the Volkswagen settlement, and $8.5 million is going to be set aside to reimburse school districts for 50% of the purchase of up to 5 school buses per district. Continuing to the next slide, we also see $58 million in offers of assistance authorized for the School Facility Construction Commission. And we also saw 4 districts receive offers of assistance set aside for new construction. Moving to the next slide, Eastern Kentucky University House Bill 366 addresses the model laboratory school, but we also see the General Assembly providing $4.5 million for the operation of the model laboratory school housed at EKU. Public Protection Cabinet, at the discretion of the local school districts, they provided language to allow for local governments may have jurisdiction for plan review, inspection, and enforcement responsibilities over buildings intended for educational purpose. This is a may, so it's flexible language. There was legislation also for this, but it didn't go anywhere. And then also we see the MSA payments of $25.5 million dedicated to early childhood development programs. On the next slide, we hit KHEA, Kentucky Higher Education Assistance Authority, and they also had legislation this session to amend and change how the dual credit component of the WorkReady Scholarship program was administered. This language effectuates that, and it puts also a ceiling on the tuition rate of 2/5 of the per credit hour charged at KCTCS. They also included language, and there's lots of questions around dual credit right now, about the dual credit scholarships awarded for the spring 2020 semester, that they cannot be reduced in light of COVID. And however, districts are going to be able to provide the educational services and hands-on learning that's going to have to take place to finalize those courses. Going to the next slide, we hit the model laboratory legislation, House Bill 366. It really updates the statute regarding how model schools and laboratories can be done. It removes language allowing any other university or college to have one, only letting EKU operate and maintain a model school. It allows for enrollment for K through 12. It requires model to participate in statewide assessments, the production of school report cards. They have to comply with the compulsory attendance and graduation requirements. They have to utilize the Kentucky Student Information System again. They can award diplomas as they do now, and they can participate in Kentucky interscholastic athletics. One thing that it does, it will allow model to participate in the education technology funding program and to be eligible to apply for or participate in all state grant programs offered to school districts. It also allows for the average daily attendance of the students attending model and practice to be included in the average daily attendance of the students' districts of residence for determining equalization. It's a big shift. Moving to House Bill 458, this is clarification of home and hospital provisions. It updates and aligns the compulsory school attendance exemptions with the home and hospital exemptions, and updates the mental health providers or licensed health and mental health providers who can provide and sign off on home and hospital recommendations. And then the last House resolution is House Resolution 130, and it encourages local boards of education to solicit private support to providing bleeding control kits and training to each local district. That's really the big overview of what happened during the regular session. I suspect during the interim, we'll know shortly what they're going to do. This was all of the budget bills that passed were for 1 year only, including transportation. The road fund was for 2 years, but the legislative branch and all the other branch budgets were for just 1 year. We'll either have to see them come back during the short session 2021 and provide a budget, which would require a constitutional majority of votes in each chamber to be able to facilitate that, or we'll have to see a special session called to address the budget situation. We'll have to see how that plays out. Obviously, the State Budget Director's Office just released its quarterly report for the third quarter, and it shows significant reduction in projected revenue for the state, up to almost $500 million over the next 3 quarters. So that's the last quarter of 2020 and the first half of 2021. So we'll have to be watching closely what they're going to do with the consensus forecasting group and other items as we move forward with what they'll do to produce a budget for next year. Moving on to the next slide, we've obviously seen a tremendous amount of activity at the federal level also that impacts what we're doing. Most of this you've already seen before. We've had the national declaration of an emergency concerning COVID. That was really important because it kicked off HHS, Health and Human Services at the federal level to gear up a national response. We've seen presidential executive orders activating the Defense Production Act, medical resources, calling up the reserves in case we need them, those types of activities. And then, of course, we've seen significant congressional legislation. Tony, if you don't mind moving ahead 2 or 3 slides to congressional legislation. And you've seen all of this before. The first big piece of legislation was the Preparedness and Response Supplemental Appropriations Act. This really did activate and provide funding for federal agencies to provide and respond to the coronavirus outbreak. And then we had the Families First Response Act, which provided almost $3.5 billion in funding for WIC and SNAP and extended federal school breakfast and lunch programs. This is where FMLA and paid sick leave coverage was expanded. Medicaid match rates for states were expanded. Payroll and individual tax credits for paid and sick and paid FMLA were expanded. And then, of course, the package that Finance has been talking to you all about the most really has been the CARES Act. And they've just updated that to the Congressional Budget Office, updated that down from 2.2 trillion expected expenditure to 1.76. We'll see what that holds. Next slide. But if you go to that, obviously the 2 big pots of money are ESSER and GEAR, and Kentucky's going to get, next slide, $193 million for the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, and then for the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund, of the almost $44 million, $30 million the Governor this year has already indicated he's going to provide for elementary and secondary education, and Finance has already provided you all with quite a bit of feedback about that. Again, we're looking at a very interesting interim. We should have from the Legislative Research Commission starting shortly provisions for how the interim will look, what the schedule will be for committee meetings, and how those committee meetings will have to be conducted, whether virtually or some limited access by the public. We're also looking and tracking what's happening with the State Budget Director's Office regarding funding and the revenue situation, as well as the budget from the executive branch federally, as well as the Congressional Budget Office. I think all of those projections for expenditures will continue to be updated regularly as we move forward in looking at relief packages. There's also still discussion about an additional relief package. They did just pass additional payroll protection legislation federally. But there's also discussions about providing some type of relief or support to state governments I don't know how far down that will go in terms of municipalities, cities, and counties, but that's also being discussed as well.
All right, thank you, Tracy. Tony, can you see if we have questions from Soapbox related to the legislative update?
I'm looking here and I'm looking to see. No, looks like we have a lot of graduation questions, a couple graduation questions, nothing on the legislative update.
We did get a comment from I received it here from a superintendent, and I think the discussion of Senate Bill 158 probably spurred this comment, talking about worrying about districts are worrying about assessment for next year because the students are going to be coming in to the next school year we always have a summer slide, but after obviously how this year has ended, even though we've had great response to NTI, we know it is much different. And then the question being whether there are any thoughts on making next year a statewide or content-wide online pilot year. So that has a little bit to do with Senate Bill 158, which the new accountability systems in a grace period anyway. But then that also has a lot to do with the federal, any waiver that we would have to see federally from an assessment and an accountability system for next year, which we don't have that at this point. And, we obviously have it for this year. That was a waiver given at the federal level. Any waiver for assessment next year would have to come from the federal government, U.S. Department of Education. I haven't heard that being discussed as of yet, but I'm sure it will be discussed. I'm not saying it will happen, but I'm sure those discussions will be taking place at the national level.
And Kevin, this is Tracy again. We'll be sending out under your email the annual update on what exactly happened in the session. We have a memo that details all of the legislation that passed, and we always send that out to superintendents. That will be forthcoming shortly.
Thank you, Tracy. We'll be getting that to you in the coming days. And Tracy, if you can just hang on through the end of the webcast, because we may have some questions coming in by Soapbox as we move on. So next we have an update on the Education Continuation Task Force with Karen Dodge. She's the department's Chief Performance Officer. Karen.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So first of all, the Education Continuation Task Force is one of several advisory groups that we have put together. And lately we've made a very concerted effort to coordinate the agendas across all of those advisory groups. And right now we're focusing on phase 2 of our COVID project. So just so you know, here within the department, we do have a COVID-19 project going on. We've considered the first phase to be getting through this school year. Phase 2 takes us into summer and also into reopening in the fall. So we were given the direction from Commissioner Brown to start moving toward that phase 2 and make all of our agenda items about summer and reopening. So that has been our focus starting in May. We've also, we always try to make sure that we have guiding questions around all of the topics that we're presenting to our advisory group so that they truly are giving us feedback and it's not just us preaching to the choir. And most recently, we've adopted exit slips. This is something that Tony started with our student advisory group, and it's worked really well. To get input from especially those students who may not speak up as much. And so we thought we'd give it a try with our other advisory groups, and we started that with the task force yesterday. And it actually went pretty well. It did get quite a bit of feedback, and that's really what I want to share with you today is that feedback. You'll be able to see the notes from the meeting on the advisory web pages. You can see any of the feedback and notes from any of those just by going to the commissioner's webpage and advisory groups. We have all of our webcasts there, so you can watch any of those meetings now, and you can see the notes that are being taken in those meetings. So this is feedback that came in after that meeting was held. And let me also just point out that the membership, because I get asked quite often, who's part of this task force? We have about 38 members of the Education Continuation Task Force, and that includes a lot of our K groups, several superintendents. We have regional co-op directors, KET, SREB, and that's just to name a few. So we talked about the CARES Act yesterday, and the question that we asked was, how can partners assist districts? So what we heard, the feedback that we got was about issues around equity and family engagement, that those will be really critical components. Greg mentioned that they have over 100 free online and virtual PDs for classified and certified staff. KET also mentioned providing PD and new resource development for statewide reach and having equitable access through them. And then other partners who also mentioned they're willing to help with any PD that they can. We then asked what are the biggest issues to address for summer learning? And the feedback that we heard there was around student participation and engagement. Just knowing the fatigue issues that are happening right now, are students really going to be able to engage in the fall? And then access to family learning materials. So if we're still in a situation like we are right now, will families be able to have the access that they need? We asked about the biggest concern regarding reentry. And one comment was that considering that we had a non-traditional end to this school year, that combined with summer slide, there's going to be an even bigger gap in learning for students in the fall. There's also concern about if the crisis continues, will we be able to enroll and engage students the way we typically do in the fall? Also identifying and meeting the academic needs of each student. So again, that goes to this untraditional ending of the year and summer slide. But the biggest concern that most people had was around safety. So no matter what else they commented on, safety, it was in just about everybody's mind and the comments that they were making. Then we asked, how can we best support students? And so there we had about sharing expertise, which is what that group is specifically pulled together to do. Constant reassurance and recognition that all student situations are not the same. So just letting them know that while we don't know exactly what each of them are going through, that the situations are all different, and we are aware of that. They've also mentioned that we just need to keep pushing out the information, letting students know what's available and how to receive what they need. And then again, another big one that came out was providing mental health resources and telehealth opportunities. We had Dr. Sweeney on the phone with us, on the call with us, and that's been a big part of a lot of our advisory groups lately is around that mental health and behavioral resources. And so that was that came out as one of the best things. One of the other questions we asked was, what was the biggest or most impactful part of this conversation? And the whole behavioral health really stood out to a lot of people on the call yesterday. And then finally, we asked how can we best support teachers? And the feedback was that we need to be attuned to the fatigue. And we need to show gratitude. We know that this is Teacher Appreciation Week, so a good time to start showing gratitude to our teachers, but not to forget that throughout this and even into the fall, just all of the hard work that's been going on behalf of the teacher or from the teachers. We need to continue to show our gratitude to them. And then provide opportunities for teachers to connect with one another. So, and that was another thing that partners wanted to be able to help with. We asked what else can we focus on moving forward with the task force, and the feedback there was that they thought we were doing a really good job putting these agendas together, that we were on the right track, and just focusing on reentry in the fall. Kevin, that's all I have from the task force.
Thank you, Karen. And related to what we discussed in the task force, and we've also discussed this issue about reentry next year on the superintendent webcast last week. I wanted, and I alluded to this earlier in the beginning of the call. I received a call today from Governor Beshear and Lieutenant Governor Coleman, and they wanted to make sure we are already thinking through what next year looks like. And as you all know, we are, and you are. And I assured him of that. And he wanted to make sure we understood that there are all kinds of scenarios that could occur, of course, when you're dealing with a global pandemic. And the good news is we have some time to plan. The bad news is we don't know exactly what we're going to be planning for. And so over the next few weeks and months is going to be a time of planning, working with you from the state level, from your partner groups, on offering guidance on your calendars. And basically, we need every district to be nimble and to be able to adjust what could be a changing public health landscape over the fall. The governor didn't call to say that to scare anybody or to alarm anyone. Everything, we hear him and every evening at 5 o'clock, and he's basing these decisions on evidence and data. But we know that when you start looking at these types of pandemics, there could be, for example, if we reach a plateau, there can always be a drop, and then there can also be a spike where you can have a recurrence. And so we want to make sure we're prepared for scenarios like that. So I just want to introduce we've talked a little bit about it already, about reentry. I want to introduce a little bit more specifics of the concepts. And then in next week's superintendent webcast, we're going to go more in depth. And of course, this is not we're not going to dictate here from the department what your calendar looks like. However, there are going to be things that you're going to have to be prepared for if the public health landscape changes and reasons change that may require starting school later or coming in earlier. So, for example, the governor wants us to make sure we're thinking through early start to a school year. What would your calendar look like if you started in very early August or even late July? And then, of course, a traditional calendar, your calendar that you would normally have and that your calendar committee would recommend and your board would approve if there was no global pandemic, a traditional plan. And then what would a calendar look like later if you started, let's say, after Labor Day? And so we're going to need you to think about all those scenarios, and perhaps, and you will need to have these discussions with your board to talk about, and you may even want to approve 3 scenarios. The reason some of you may ask, well, why would we need to start early? Well, if we have a plateau over the summer in COVID cases or even a drop, then there could be a spike in the fall. So if we're able to go back early, and we do go back early, some of you choose to go back early, then that would be a larger number of in-person classes that you could have under your belt, so to speak, before we would, let's say if we hit a spike and we would have to go for a period of several weeks or something of NTI again, or if you had enough under your belt, maybe you wouldn't need to do NTI and you would just cancel classes for a few weeks. So again, we don't know that any of this will occur, but we need in the time of a global pandemic to be prepared. And so that's what the discussion is going to be about, us providing guidance to you, the best information that we have, so that you can plan and make plans with your community and with your local board about various calendar options, and then have the ability to be nimble and change if circumstances change as we get closer to the beginning of the school year and as we are in the school year. So, and not to concern you even more, but when we talk about an early plan, a traditional plan, and a late plan that begins later in the year, we also need to layer in there options within those openings. So for example, if you started early, there still may be some social distancing requirements that you will need to satisfy as a school district to ensure I'm just throwing this out. I have no reason to believe that this would be a requirement under public health, but for example, if you have a 60 passenger bus, we may be in one of the phases related to COVID that it would be best practice to have your bus only carry 30 students. I just throw that out as an example. And so my point is there may be things, even if you go back to in-person classes, that you will have to layer into that calendar plan to be able to adjust to the requirements of the pandemic. You've heard and we've talked a little bit about a staggered schedule. We've had at least one superintendent kind of a back of the napkin type exercise that he put into an email, which was actually a very good plan about, what if we brought a certain group of students in as group A and then group B. And so all those types of things we're going to be offering guidance on. Again, this is not to dictate to you how you open school next year, but you have to be prepared for what the public health pressures may be, and that we have to actually respond to those to ensure that we have safe communities. And of course, the most important priority would be our safe students and then safe employees of our school district. So I know everyone, we're already thinking in that way. We're working with the Council of Chief State School Officers as well as the Southern Regional Education Board. As you all know, Dr. Pruitt is the head of the SREB. They are producing I believe it's called a playbook that will assist schools and districts in reopening. And then I've also we've been having conversations through SREB with the Georgia Department of Education and their chief. I borrowed and I'm stealing from their chief. They broke down the 5 categories of opening to the traditional opening, the adjusted opening, partial opening, and that would be if you only had, let's say, you had a certain percentage of your staff that were sick due to COVID, or maybe there was a flu, a traditional flu going through your community, you couldn't open. What does a partial opening look like? And then a general postponement, and then intermittent closure. And then, of course, you could layer in NTI on almost all of those options as well. So we're going to settle on terms that we like in Kentucky and we think make sense for Kentucky and our guidance. But I just wanted to let you all know what our thinking is, what the governor is always thinking about public schools. He wanted to make sure that we were thinking ahead, which was the purpose of his call today. And just know that that's going to be the topic as we move forward over the next few weeks. So, Tony, I think I'm sure that will generate a lot of questions. And then I think you had some other questions coming in on general topics throughout the webcast.
Yes, we did. And some of them are related to graduations. So I don't know if we want to, I'll go to the soapbox and talk a little bit about, well, there was a question about the task force, and they wanted to know if it's possible to be more inclusive in the task force. They said they believe there's only one superintendent on the continuation task force. And so I can, I know that I've been doing, trying to send you all, and I know I have, keeping up with our promise to send you, the superintendents, a copy of the video and the news story that comes, or the press release, before we send it out publicly ahead of time. And I'm not sure if there's a possibility for us to stream that yet or not, but maybe Kevin, you can address that.
I'm certainly open to streaming it. We modeled the task force. Over the years, you've heard of the Guiding Coalition, and that was the coalition of the various role groups within the education family to advise the department and the commissioner on major policy issues. And so we actually, right around the time that the pandemic started, we were getting ready to have a Guiding Coalition meeting. And so I decided and talked with Karen Dodd to convert the Guiding Coalition just temporarily over to the Education Continuation Task Force. And we actually expanded the membership from the Guiding Coalition to make it larger and more honed in on K-12. for this. And then, of course, when a new commissioner is here, he or she may want to revert back to the other guiding coalition. So that, I just want you to know the history of how we came up with the membership. All of the K groups are represented on the task force, including KASA and KASS, as well as all 8 cooperatives. And so, and we also wanted to make the size manageable, and it's still around, I think, 38 people. So we tried to include every role group, and we did include every role group. And in some aspects, superintendents are probably more represented than others when you just look at the role groups. Now, the fact I think we may only have one active superintendent, but you are represented through your membership organizations as well as the co-ops.
Okay. They also wanted to have a copy of this PowerPoint, which I believe has been updated in your invite, but I am going to send that out to you right now. So just look for it in your emails. Should be popping up here in the next couple of minutes. I've had several requests of that come up in the soapbox. Next question is, they are wanting to know if they can have permission to have a drive-in graduation ceremony similar to what Hardin County is doing. And they didn't know if it is acceptable and if it is approved, as it does allow for persons to exit their vehicles, but in an outdoors environment.
The general rule that we followed on the drive-in, so first of all, we've given you 3 options that meet the current restrictions as indicated by the governor and have been signed off on by public health. And they signed off just on those general parameters that we gave you in that guidance document. The 3 options being the complete virtual ceremony, of course, where everything occurs online. The second being the drive-in, drive-up, or drive-through, which is modeled after how churches in your communities are having those services. And by and large, from what we've heard the governor say, those have been successful, and they've also been following those 4 to 5 rules about staying in your car, not passing anything, etc. And then the third option, what we call the Gulfport model, which we believe the idea originated in Gulfport, Mississippi, that you have students arrive at individually scheduled times for like an appointment, and then they can bring a very limited number of family members, and then they can proceed through a graduation, receipt of a diploma, take a picture. It's filmed with very limited contact using social distancing with the principal and or assistant principal or others that might be proved to be there. And then, of course, that video is edited together, and then everyone has a video at the end of the day with everybody kind of walking one after the other for the graduation. That's called the Gulfport model. When you start deviating from those general parameters about whether you can get out of your car, stay in your car, all those are questions you have to ask your local public health department and health officials. So if the person that asked that question, I'm assuming and hoping that if Hardin County is having folks get out of their car for the drive-in, my assumption is they had consultation with and approval from the local health department to do that. And when we talked about on the webinar last time, there may or may not be reasons why your local health officials may give you guidance one way or the other, and it could in fact differ from another local health department. Again, we're not trying to pass the buck to the local health departments, but they are of course the experts on the public health side of this. And they know your communities, they know your building setups, they know your ingress and egress from parking lots and where there are choke points, or at least if they don't know, they are there in the community, can learn about those and ask questions that could have a public health impact when you start talking about a flow of people. So I can't give you a yes or no on getting out of the car. Our general guidance has been that the rules have to be those that churches are following. And it's my understanding, I think this has been repeated over and over by the governor at the 5 o'clock press conference, that there's that church service, those rules mean you cannot get out of your car. And that's why those have been so successful. And there have been no, it's not added, from what I can understand, to the spread in those communities, but has allowed folks to meet as part of their congregation.
question is also related to graduation. And again, I think a lot of these questions are going to kind of go back to the same theme, which is checking in with your local, because it is a lot of questions on this county is doing this versus can we do that? And a lot of our guidance is based on checking in with your local health department. So so there is a question, again, if schools do the Gulfport model, they're wanting to know if outside is safer, small groups of cars parked so they can get through this, more efficiently. Is this okay? I think they're just wanting assurance. So I don't know how you want to answer these specific questions.
Yeah,
on
I mean,
that.
so for all those types of questions, again, you really, and I know you all already have relationships with your health department, but you've got to sit down with them and have a conversation about all these specifics about this graduation, because there are little issues, just like this question mentions, that they can help guide you on those types of rules that you're going to have to enforce. And don't forget, you're going to have to enforce. There's going to be a large temptation, no matter if you have option 2 or option 3 graduations, there's still going to be a temptation for Sally to run out of the car and hug Johnny or hug a teacher that they haven't seen in 2 months. So, and I know you all know that, but it's going to take a lot of coordination and a lot of planning, and particularly when you use the Gulfport model, that's almost down to a military type operation of being precise and having people show up on time, and not having too many come to the parking lot at one time and lining up and all those types of things.
All
Now,
right.
if we start hearing the same question or you're having issues, then we're certainly glad to elevate that to our public health counterparts here. But I'm sure that when you talk to your local health department, if they have questions about something you're proposing, they have counterparts that they're going to automatically talk to regionally or at the state level to help them on that side of it, because these are public health issues. I think we have 3 really good alternative options. They are far from perfect, and we all know we want an in-person ceremony, but I'm seeing a lot of folks be really creative about this, and they're also kind of having other events alongside that to build up senior spirit and those types of things, like parades, and like you've seen the teacher parade similar for the seniors. So I know there's a lot of creative thinking going on out there, and the students are going to benefit from it. So thank you for that.
There's a clarification wanting to know if any of our guidance is going to change after some of the phases change, like on May 20th. Getting out of your car, will that change when the worship service in person changes? So if your graduation service is held after the 20th, will people be able to get out of their car then?
I don't have the guidance that we wrote on the 3 graduation options were written based upon the current restrictions that are in place. Kay Kennedy is on. I will have her follow up with Dr. White at DPH to see if that changes any of the guidance that we have issued. If it does, we will issue an updated guidance document. Unless, Kay, you have a further comment on that.
Kevin, I do not. That sounds like a good plan. We'll check with DPH.
Okay, and then there's one district or one superintendent saying that their health department is saying that they're following the KDE guidelines so that they're not getting a final decision. So whichever superintendent that is, because I can't tell which one that is, if you want to send us an email, and then, I mean, we're trying to do the best that we can here, and we can try to help you out with that. Our guidelines were very, they're just guidelines. We're trying to get to where we can. When we worked with the department, when we worked with DPH, they were very basic in that they wanted to make sure that local health departments were consulted when dealing with local graduations, because what was happening in one county may not be happening in another. And so it was very, they were very specific on wanting to make sure that local departments were consulted. The next question is they were wanting to know about the cords and things like that, is if they come up with, if there was a possibility to do industry certifications online or in person with smaller individual groups, because students are not getting their graduation cords and the scholarships because of not being able to come in to get those. Or to take those, sorry.
Well, and I think that's obviously related to whether or not students will be able to take industry certification before graduation. David Horseman, I know we've been monitoring that issue. I know the cords are for more than just industry certs, they're for other things. But as an example, David, I don't think we've had an update on or any changes on the industry certification process at this time. Of course, that could change as we go on through the summer if restrictions are lifted. Is that correct? We will get a Jennifer, if you'll flag that one to get a follow-up from David. He may not be on today.
I'm on, Kevin.
Oh.
I just, we've got a lot of information online about industry certifications, and there's really not a definitive answer on when we can get in to do them and if we can. So that it's just kind of an ongoing thing as it evolves as our access to the buildings. The MNA question is one that we're working on some final guidance on that. We've been working with KCTCS and legal, and that should be out tomorrow. That's one of the more pressing ones as to how to get that clinical experience. So look for something on that, and keep watching the COVID web page regarding industry certs.
Okay.
Thank you, David. Tony, while you're going to the next one, I have one that came through here. A question about summer feeding and what does summer feeding look like when we get into June, whether it's going to be the normal summer feeding that we would have, let's say, in a traditional summer, which is obviously congregate feeding, or with non-congregate feeding. And the superintendent mentions that the waiver we have through U.S. Department of Agriculture through June for non-congregate feeding, and what is our expectation and recommendation. Robin, you can chime in here, but I think we've said on another webcast or another web, maybe not with superintendents, but with others, that we do expect, we are certainly pushing for the U.S. Department of Agriculture to continue the waiver of the for non-congregate feeding through the summer, knowing we're still going to be, the pandemic will likely still be going on. And I think at this time, our recommendation is going to be for June to plan on, of course, your feeding in a non-congregate setting.
Kevin,
Robin,
this is Robin.
Oh, go ahead.
Yep.
Yeah, that's correct. Currently, the waivers right now are through the end of June, and we have been in regular conversation with the Southeast Regional Office in Atlanta, as well as the National USDA, requesting additional waiver, whether that would be a nationwide waiver, or if we could just ask for that waiver as a state, one way or the other. That's the way we will proceed. So if we don't hear something fairly soon from a national basis, we will make a request for the Commonwealth of Kentucky as a state waiver. So we will continue to advocate for that for summer feeding.
All right. All right, going on. Next, there's these are some questions about returning to school. Will we come up when we can come, sorry, we're tied there. Will a discussion surround the possible change if we return with attendance, specifically if a child spikes a fever and needs to be out for more time than normal?
Robin, you want to tackle that one? That may be something.
I don't know that I have an answer for that right now. I think we have to keep in mind every little nuance, every little regulation or statute that controlled how we operate in a school environment right now or previously is now under consideration. So there may be possibilities that we need to look at if we have a child that's very sick that needs to stay out longer. We do have, home hospital provisions and what that means. So we got some flexibility in this last session and to deliver that instruction in a different way. And I think we've already talked about that. But I think as we continue to think about the things that we still need to look into, I know on an earlier call today, we were talking about vaccinations. What is that going to look like for those student vaccines that need to happen before they start school? Maybe we need to look at that. So all of our usual and routine and customary processes, I think we're always open to consideration, weighing the risk and the benefit for local school districts and for our students.
Sorry, related to that question, they also wanted to know, and I know this hasn't been addressed, but this perhaps is an idea to put out there about using unlimited or like NTI days for individual students if they're out because they're sick with fever. I don't think, in addition to attendance, could we possibly institute individual NTI days for kids that may need to be out due to fever, etc. So I think
And that's something we're going to need to give guidance on over the next few weeks. That deals partially with a home hospital issue that also has to do with obviously NTI, and then could also deal with the ability to have competency-based learning. So that's a good David Cook / Kay Kennedy question.
Okay. Another possibility is, well, I know this question has not been, does the emergency legislation passed this year with unlimited NTI days apply to next year too?
So as of right now, the emergency NTI days, and you're granted as many as you need to get to your 1,062, that is only for this school year that of course ends June 30. We'll be monitoring as we move forward through the summer. And of course, if we believe we're in a position that we have to use NTI in a similar way next year, next semester, even if it's just for a limited period, we will be prepared to offer, again, emergency relief if we need to do that. And it very well may not be me, but I'm sure the person sitting here will feel the same way.
We can come up with different scenarios for opening school. However, we don't know what will be allowed or what is permissible and what minimum requirements we would have to meet. In addition to that, the next line is that parents, someone just bumped it up, sorry. Would you recommend that school systems offer both in-person and online classes? Some parents will not be comfortable regardless of when we open.
We received a similar question to that. I believe it was on the task force yesterday that we're looking into that deals quite a bit with the where the home hospital designation, how far that can go. We will have an answer on that in our guidance. And if you will flag that, Jennifer, to make sure we need to make sure we bring that up again in the next week's webcast, in addition to just putting it on the Q&A.
And to follow up with that, it says, I envision the need for more home hospital services. Thoughts? So flag that one as well.
Flag that one. Kelly Foster and David, if you all will flag that as well too. That also dovetails in with the update that Tracy gave on the new home hospital legislation that clarified and simplified that to a degree.
Okay, in the discussions of opening school in the fall with an AB or morning afternoon schedule, what is being proposed to support parents for childcare when their students are away from school?
Well, we know we have a lot of people talking and thinking about that. That's been a very a topic of conversation by the Pritchard Committee and other partner groups. It was a focus of conversation, and all of my webinars are running together, either one of the Pritchard Committee forums or maybe it was also the KET forum. I don't know that I've seen a proposal, but I do know that it is being discussed as a barrier and as a very pressing problem.
Okay, one thing that they would like us to look at or to consider is the requirement for physicals for students, as doctors' offices right now will not currently schedule those for families.
I believe that's already on the radar, but Kay Kennedy and then our nurse consultant, Angie McDonald, will you all flag that one for follow-up?
Yes, we've got it,
That
Kim.
will be
Thanks.
great. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, moving on to the next question. This is going to be a clarification on equitable services. The need to contact homeschools/private schools again. Although we have already sent out notices in March regarding the CARES Act, if they were in operation prior to the act. I guess they want clarification on that.
Tony, this is David. If they have already sent out their notices for participation, they will have to do separate notices for CARES Act funding because it's opened up to all private schools again as a separate pot of funding.
Okay, so they'll have to notify again.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Next question is, should we be providing masks for all workers coming into the school now? I'm assuming as of May 11th.
Yeah, as of May 11th, the mask requirement does go into effect. It is not going to be enforced as far as there are not going to be penalties. However, it is pretty much a mask requirement wherever you go and out in public in Kentucky. That would include workers coming in and out of your buildings, and of course, if you have contractors, but also workers that you have there, of course, on a limited basis and being socially distant from one another. We discussed, I believe it was on the last week's webcast, that many folks, of course, because they're going to be going to Walmart or the dollar store or wherever, they're going to have their own mask, and these can be the cloth masks, and actually encouraged to be the cloth mask because the N95 masks need to be reserved for the healthcare setting. The mask requirement on May 11 for the general public would be any type of a mask that fits snugly over the nose and the mouth, and you've seen the governor explain that on the press conferences. So I believe the majority of your employees are going to have them, or if they walk up to the building and don't, they're most likely going to have them in their car on May 11th, because they're probably also going to want to go to Walmart or Kroger or other places. But to the extent that they do not, our advice last week was that you should have a supply of those types of the paper or the cloth masks for employees that do not have them with them beginning May 11th. Kay, is that consistent with what we've been saying?
Yes, Chief, in our guidance will be the governor's steps to healthy at work.
Okay. And again, that's as Kay referenced, that's as we've been talking about healthy at home, the governor has been, the next phase is healthy at work. And then that comes with, if you get on the COVID-19 webpage, the Kentucky webpage, it will have that this detailed information about the healthy at work requirements.
All right. Is there a plan to address homeschool where worried parents may choose to homeschool children versus sending them to in-person classes?
Well, we don't have a plan other than to keep communicating with parents, which is a plan, and we're doing that from the state level. I've been issuing letters to parents, but obviously parents do have the right to choose to homeschool children and or send them to to private schools if they choose to do so. Communication at the district level with your parents is key to making sure that they are aware of all the efforts going on and the resources available in your school district. I would encourage you, I know you're all doing that already, but to the extent you have parents that may be a little bit not as engaged, and you have the ability to utilize your Friskies employees or others to reach out to them in the appropriate way, obviously with social distancing, then, and I know you're doing a lot of that already. I think that's the key to having that engagement.
Okay, there's another question about, this is more of a comment. Is it time to reconsider using the ADM instead of the ADA for funding purposes, as we will be encouraging students to stay at home more frequently? And then,
Well,
oh, go ahead.
the ADM has been an item of discussion even before the pandemic hit, and there are obviously pros and cons to that. It's yet to be seen whether, we're going to have a significant attendance decrease because of this. But I anticipate the ADM will continue to be a topic of discussion, particularly as we it's been discussed fairly regularly over the last few years as to whether SEEK needs to be looked at for any possible amendments and changes.
Is there a specific day that we need to use for enrollment numbers?
Robin, I'll defer to you on that one.
I'm not sure what the question is asking. Whoever is asking that question, if you want to just shoot me an email directly, and I'll, with a little more clarification, and we'll get it answered for you.
All right, your next question, I think this has popped up again. Private schools, I think this is in regards to equitable. So David, this might be you. Does this include homeschools in our district? And I believe the answer to that was yes.
That is correct, it does.
Okay, so notification does include homeschools in the district. Next question is, we are in need of meeting special education timelines. Are we able to meet one-on-one with a child wearing PPE and social distancing to administer certain evaluations?
I think, Sylvia, are you on for Greta today? Can you take that one?
Actually, this is Greta.
Oh.
I'm fine. This is also one of those questions in which you need to work directly with your health department, because as we move forward, depending on where we are with regard to, just the pandemic itself, I think it's gonna be really dependent upon those governor's recommendations and thinking about the phases as we move forward and the healthy at work option. So my recommendation would be to work directly with your local health departments, and we will continue also to work to receive additional guidance. And if there's anything, Kevin or Kay, that you want to add to that'd be great. But we haven't received any other additional guidance specific to this question.
All right, I will see. Let's see if there's, I'm looking to see. I have not seen a follow-up on the, go ahead. Go ahead.
I have one while you're looking. A question that came into me. Robin, Kenny, this will be for you and me jointly. Has there been discussion about budget reductions as a result of the projected budget shortfall in the current fiscal year for districts, including large funding items like safe schools, state agency programs, et cetera?
Yeah, Kevin, I can respond to that. As many of you may have saw in the news media, the end of last week, the Office of the State Budget Director issued a letter to state agencies advising us of the anticipated revenue shortfall for the rest of this fiscal year. So that's the fiscal year we're in right now that would end on June 30th. And each agency was given a target number to hit in anticipation of this shortfall. For the Department of Education, our number was a little more than $3.1 million. That was the amount that we were requested to come up with. And at this time, from that $3 million, when we were asked to look at our general fund dollars, SEEK was exempted. And so that was not used as part of the decision making in arriving at our number. And local health insurance was not included in any consideration. We at the department have been looking and have come up with a tentative plan. And at this time, we do not see that it will impact local school districts directly in funding that is previously ready to go out the door to you. So at this time, we're going to try to solve it another way. I will share with you, and it's important to note, we are now getting down to the bone. We talk sometimes about, are we in the flesh still, or are we down to the bone? And especially for the Department of Education and our operations, we have significantly lost numbers of staff. And what that is going to impact is level of services or services that can be provided to our local school districts. We're going to talk a little bit more about this at our at the meeting this week with the Kentucky Board of Education on a very high level. And then at our June meeting, when we give the overall budget and legislative update from the General Assembly session, we're going to talk about more historically where the department finds itself in the context of budget reductions and anticipated really reduction in revenues. It's something that we have to just realistically think about. So even though we might find a way to get through this additional reduction, as we look to the future, we all can tell already that the economy is not where it needed to be in anticipation of the budget that was even passed just a short time ago. So there's going to have to be some adjustments. And of course, we will provide you any information that we have along the way that we can share at the appropriate time. This is not said in a manner to hit a panic button. It is really just to be realistic and for us to all be able to plan together. So, Kevin, do you have any other thoughts that you'd like to add?
No, Robin, I think you hit it. We will be providing you additional, more detailed updates as we move on about the budget. One reason we didn't include that as an agenda item today was because we were able to solve the $3 million we've been asked to come up with as part of the 1% without affecting districts to a large extent at all. But as Robin said, that's probably going to be the last time we're going to be able to do that. And we were also even preparing internal to KDE some reductions and other reorganizations because of the appropriation that was just from the regular appropriation we got for the upcoming year was not what we needed it to be. And so making changes, as you all do the same thing every day. We run 2 schools and the area technology centers, and so we have some of the same budget issues and staffing issues that you do. And so we were already going through that exercise, and then we had this reduction, and then of course we have a prediction of a reduction in revenue overall that will obviously affect the ability of the state possibly to meet the the budget that will start on July 1st. But as we know additional information that will impact districts, you can be sure that we will get that to you and have the ability to talk to you through Webcast about that information.
Okay. So I just opened, so there's a couple of questions that were submitted through the Google Drive. And so there's a couple in here related to budget. So will each school district be able to pay for half of up to 5 buses with the Volkswagen money? And is that this year only?
So the language in the budget bill relating to the Volkswagen settlement is actually going to be administered by the Energy and Environment Cabinet. So we're happy to take your questions, but we won't be able to answer that. I don't think they've started rolling out any guidance or directive on how that's going to work necessarily. So really all we have at this time is what's contained in the language in the budget bill. As soon as they are ready to issue guidance, we will make sure that we are providing that to local school districts. So please watch the Commissioner's Monday message. We'll provide links to that and be able to pass along information as that is provided to us from the other cabinet.
Okay, so there's a couple of questions about hiring a football coach during this uncertain time for summer practices. Do you feel like this is that the season will occur? Should a principal or athletic director be allowed to fill in lieu of a coach being hired until we know if a season will exist?
Robin, unless you want to take that, my recommendation would be, I think there are too many unknowns. The summary of this webcast will go down as having more questions than we have answers for, unfortunately. It's hard to say, and sometimes whether we're going to have a season or not, because there are a lot of, you heard the governor talk about, for example, when churches come back in, but yet we shouldn't be having choir because we know that there have been instances around the country where members of a choir have attained COVID at a higher rate than others in that church congregation. A lot of that has to do with close contact, being right side by side in a choir, and you're singing and you're expressing droplets. Same thing. Let's say that we're back in school, but football may be an activity where because we know there's such close contact, it could be a very high risk activity, even though in other areas we're somewhat back to normal. So there are just so many unknowns right now about that. That doesn't give you much of an answer to plan on. I would also encourage you, if you haven't already, to talk to KHSAA and Commissioner Tackett as to what they may be recommending or forecasting for the fall.
Okay. The next question is just a question about whether they can consolidate in technology and utilize more text in lieu of a DTC, allowing a director of operations to serve as a supervisor and contract out additional management to assist with online learning needs due to COVID-19.
I think that question involves about 3 different people: David Couch, David Cook, and maybe Robin.
I'm going to mute myself. So you all have it. I'll go right at it.
From a contracting perspective, if you have some needs that you want to hire some contract staff to come in and help with deployment of devices or anything like that, which is more of a temporary in nature to kind of get you started up, I think that's permissible under the uses of the CARES Act funding if you think that is a good use of your funds. I've started to say over and over again, and just as a reminder, these are federal funds that will go away. So please plan carefully for both short-term solutions and long-term solutions, because they do have to last for a while. But if that is determined to be one of your high need uses and a good thing for your school district, then the contractual obligation.
Uh-oh, did we lose her?
Well, I'll finish on with, this is David Couch. I'll finish on, I lead the Office of Education Technology. So if I understood the question correctly, it was the district technology coordinator, also called DTC, who typically leads the overall effort for education technology for the district, the instructional, the administrative, and the pure technical. So the downside of just moving to a pure technical position and not having someone we call the CIO, the Chief Information Officer, DTC, is you would lose that connection to, are they staying connected to what you're trying to do instructionally, as well as administratively and as well as technically. So we've done something across the state that most people are familiar with. It's called the people side of education technology, that identifies these roles and the number that are needed. in order to support the size of organization that you have. But as Robin was talking about, during this short period of time, you may need to temporarily beef up your staff on the technical staff to deploy a true one-to-one that they take home, but also your digital learning coaches to make sure your teachers not understand just the technology, but also really how to use it effectively in teaching and learning in a variety of scenarios, whether the students right in front of them, or they have part of the students in front of them and part of them watching remotely, or they're all watching remotely. So they have to be familiar with all those tools in the toolbox. So it is a variety of folks, but just keep in mind, if you move away from someone overall leading it, you really do lose a connectedness to the bigger picture things you're trying to do in your organization.
Okay. Anybody else want to jump in? Okay. All right. There was a question that was submitted to me via email about KDE guidance on senior parade activities. And I know that there was, they noted that there is a parade with cars, but this particular parade involves students walking in a parade, and didn't know if there was guidance particularly about that.
Well, we haven't issued guidance on parades. You need to be very careful. Any type of an event like that needs to be in coordination with your local health department officials. Anytime you have students together, there's going to be a attraction to get together, to get closer than 6 feet. There's going to be laughing and fellowshipping, and so there's all kinds of problems with that. But you need to be, even, and as we said last week, even if you're doing a complete virtual graduation, you need to consult with your health department, because there's going to be a need for some staff members to be in a room together. Potentially, you can do it without that. We're doing that. We're doing this webcast right now, and nobody at KDE is in the same room. However, my point was, even if you're doing a complete virtual solution, you need to consult your health department to make sure there's not something you forgot or that you're inadvertently doing that could increase the risk. And the same would go to that kind of parade. My recommendation to you from the department would be that there should not be students out walking in a parade, but I'm not, we know that if you're consulting with the health department there locally and they've signed off on that, then they are the last word on that, because they are the public health officials in your community.
Okay. It's a comment just submitted here. If there's questions, it looks like KHSAA Commissioner Tackett is going to be having a phone Q&A on Friday. So I'm guessing that is open to superintendents. That's just a comment here in the soapbox. Question, when will we receive the flexible funds state grant tentative allocations for fiscal year 21?
Are they talking about funds for next school year, or the federal funds we receive through the CARES Act?
Just says the flexible funds state grant tentative allocations for fiscal year 21. It looks like state funds.
David Malonte, are you still on? Do you know when those are going out?
Kelly, this is Charlie.
Go for it, Charlie.
Thank you. I'm guessing that they're asking about the state Flex Focus funds, ESS. Now it's just ESS and Safe Schools. And those are planned to go out on the normal schedule beginning early July. And we've already made the payments ending this year for the fourth quarter of 2020.
Okay.
And if you were referencing federal funds, I know that we were waiting on everything. We had everything except rural education, and that came in late last week. So we will definitely get some more guidance to you on that, but I believe they should be coming out shortly.
All right. House Bill 352 allows flexibility to use ESS funds for general operating expenses. but the flexibility still there to transfer to other funds within flexible focus funds like preschool, safe schools, instructional resources, etc.? Charlie, maybe?
Yes, this is Charlie. So the language is in House Bill 352 to allow districts to flex out of flex focus. So for general operating, and the regular flex language always remains. So there's no question about that, which would allow districts to flex within the flex focus funding. So if they wanted to use ESS funds for PD, that is allowable. There are some special circumstances with preschool, and if they're wanting to use their preschool funds, they should just send us an email first.
Okay. All right. I think that sums up questions right now that I see on here. I'm looking to see if I missed anything. If Kevin, if you want to.
Sure. And again, the webcast next week, we had tentatively held the Thursday for a webcast. I don't believe we're going to need to have one Thursday. We will have another webcast, though, at the same time, 2 o'clock Eastern time on Tuesday. A large portion of that webcast will be devoted to further exploration and guidance on the calendar options that I talked about earlier, about needing to be prepared for various scenarios, be nimble as we move into the fall semester with still a lot of unknowns. I know today may have been one of the more frustrating webcasts you've seen and participated in a while because we still have a lot of unanswered questions, and I'm sorry for that. But I do want to end with a text that I received from one of the superintendents, one of your colleagues, while this was going on. I think this sums up probably what a lot of you are feeling, but it also sums up for me who you are and who Kentucky superintendents and leaders are. And the text says, quote, talking about everything I'm describing about graduation in the beginning of the year, quote, may be doable, but there are 1,000 hypotheticals to plan for. Also, financial impact could be incredible, i.e. multiple bus runs for the same location. We are all in, but this is going to be difficult to keep people motivated, patient, and moving. But we can do it, end quote. And I know that sums up the way a lot of you are feeling. The important thing for me is, though, that I know all of you have the can-do-it attitude, and you know that we're going to do it, and we're going to be responsive because you all are in this. You're doing this not because it's a business, but because it's a career and it's a profession, and you care about your communities and you care about your kids. So I'll leave you with that. We had several questions that we made notes of that we were going to get back to you, and we will not only put those in the Q&As, but we'll also lead off with those in the Q&A for on next Tuesday's webcast. So those of you at KD that I said flag, Tony, make sure we lead off with those question and answers that we didn't have answers for today. Again, thank you all for what you're doing. And as this superintendent said, we can do it. Thank you all.
Thank you.